sides of his father's family for over 25 years. For 4.5 years, on each Sunday, he helped a full-time researcher at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum with requests that were submitted by people who hoped to find out what happened to their family members and friends during the Holocaust. Research was performed in the International Tracing Service Repository of Records, which now contains over 200 million scanned images and either 31 or 32,000 collections.
I checked it, it's 31.
31.
31.
Dave has also been a member of the Howard County Holocaust Remembrance Committee for the past 12 years. And he's actually my husband. So without further ado.
All right. All right. Well, I want to start off with thanking all of you for being here. And that's just not a perfunctory thank you. It's a thank you from here. I deeply mean it. So I'd like to say a little bit about why I do this. Bottom line is there's too much hatred in the world. Prior years and even up to today. There's just way too much. And I have never liked that in my entire life since I was this big. So I don't believe that a child can be friends with a parent. But when the child becomes an adult, I think it's a reasonable and valid thing for the child to become a friend of the parent. And my father became my best friend. He suffered. He was a wonderful man, absolutely wonderful man, happy man, loved his family, but he suffered, and you'll see basically how and why through this. I mean, one of the things that I can say up front, I remember as a child watching him. I don't know if any of you have seen this, but during some World War II movies, they show actual footage from concentration camps. He would get up close to the TV and look for his mother. And it would tear my heart out. And I do it for more than that. I also do it because it isn't just to remember people from then, from the Holocaust. That's extremely important to me, and I think it's extremely important. But it's important to inform us for today, to understand that why we should not hate, why people, I mean, there are certainly a lot of people who don't, and I know that. But there are those who do. And I know it's hard to persuade those people not to hate, but I think, in my mind, the people kind of on the fence can be pushed to the right side when they hear certain things potentially. And so I hope that maybe in a small way, what I am going to impart and tell people through the years, because I am dedicated to this, I've dedicated my life to this for over 25 years. My father passed away in 1998, and I started the research a couple years before he died. He would have been by my side otherwise, you know, all the time, but unfortunately couldn't be. Let's see here. Let me give a quick overview of the composition of the presentation. I'm going to give some general information about the Holocaust. I'm not really going to say what it is. If someone, you know, has a question about it, certainly let me know. And by the way, I'm really happy to answer questions, but if we can leave them for the end, I would appreciate it. I think that'll work probably the best. So I'll give an overview of some things. I look at the numbers a bit differently. I try to put them in a certain context because I think it gives a certain reality, an even better reality to what actually happened. After that, I'm going to show you a few examples of the letters that my father received and saved from the moment that he left Berlin, Germany at the age of 14. He received 150 letters. I scanned every letter, every page, front and back of the envelope, and learned a lot, and I'm still learning a lot. After that, the next part will be some scanned images from the archives that my wife mentioned, the International Tracing Service records, which are now, it's now called the Arolsen Archive. And it's in Bad Arolsen, Germany, and they have the physical copies, and they are putting on the internet now. They didn't have it before. They are putting most of these records on the internet now. Finally, I'm going to show a couple of family photographs, and I'm going to do a little summary of the fate of my family. Okay? So, if you can just bear with me, I'm going to ask you to do something to start off here a little bit different. If everyone can close their eyes for just a couple of moments, a few moments. So what I'd like you to imagine is this. Imagine that you are 14 years old. You're living in Berlin, Germany, and it is the day that you're going to leave. You're going to leave your parents and your entire family behind. And your mother and you end up in Hamburg, Germany, where a lot of the other part of the family is there. And it's the day that you leave, and you are going to a country where you know one person in the entire vast country. And by the way, you don't speak a word of the language that they speak there. You can open your eyes. That person was my father, and he's pictured here on his passport photo. And as I've said, he was 14 years old. He left on the 14th of December in 1936, boarded a ship called the U.S. Manhattan. Just a little aside, just a little light thing. The ship he took from Germany to the United States was the same ship that Jesse Owens took to Germany a few months earlier for the Berlin Olympics. The same ship. It's also the same ship that his brother took the year before and the two little siblings took in 1939, at the beginning of 39. Okay, so 6 million Jews and millions of others perished in the Holocaust. And I do not make light of the millions of others. I have not quantified it because there is no exact number. You'll see some of the information as to a very large number associated with non-Jewish Poles, but it is not absolutely quantified. A lot of times people say 5 million in addition to the 6 million Jews. But since I can quantify the 6 million, let's take a look at what that means. If you took the states of Delaware, Nebraska, New Hampshire, North Dakota, as you can see, hopefully you can see, it totals just maybe 42,000 under 6 million. So the picture here is every single person in those 4 states was murdered. That would be the equivalent, not one person walking. To look at it another way, just quickly, those cities, Atlanta, Boston, Detroit, Las Vegas, Milwaukee, New Orleans, San Francisco, San Jose, and Washington, D.C. My beloved Washington, D.C. All of those come up to just under 6 million. Again, the same concept. Every single person was killed. That's what the 6 million means. Okay. Now, again, I don't like when people don't even speak about the other people because I think it's incredibly important. The killing of the Jews was an act of genocide. The others who were killed were killed. It wasn't necessarily an act of genocide, but it was so important. So you can see here, non-Jewish Polish civilians, around 1.8 million is the number that the U.S. Holocaust Museum has, were killed. And given the predominant religion in Poland, Roman Catholic, most of those people were Roman Catholic. I don't have a number, but you can just tell just by virtue of what the percentage of the population was. Now this one is, I mean, they're all horrible, but people with mental and physical disabilities living in institutions, up to 250,000 people murdered. There was a euthanasia program. The Nazis, it was the Nazi systematic killing of those with physical and mental disabilities in institutions in Germany and German-occupied, conquered territories. These people did not fit the envisioned, racially pure, and productive society. So they were murdered. They were taken out of the institutions and murdered. Roma, Gypsies, between, as you see, 250,000 million. Jehovah Witnesses, around 1900. Repeat criminal offenders and so-called asocials, at least 70,000, including hundreds and possibly thousands of homosexuals. And then German political opponents and resistance activists in Axis-occupied territory, the number is undetermined. And then finally, priests and other Christian leaders, the number is undetermined. So all these people perished alongside the Jews. So the next few slides are going to be bar graphs, and I think it is the most straightforward way of getting a sense of the impact. And each pair of those represents a country. On the left, the green, the light green bar is how many people were in that, how many Jews were in that particular country prior to the Holocaust. And then the orange one to the right in the pair indicates how many were there after. So if you look at the first one, and by the way, the orders of magnitude on these four slides, meaning along here, are different. Okay, and I couldn't put the others together because you're talking about here millions of people, and the last slide of the series is only going to be about 7,500, so it just wouldn't have looked right. So you see there, Poland, 3.35 million Jews before the Holocaust. After the Holocaust, 465,000. Close to, but not up to 3 million perished, so like 2.8 million. And then, of course, next to that is the Soviet Union. Not nearly as many, but still, it's a massive number. 1.3 to 1.4 million perished. I won't go through each of these because it's a lot of countries, but you can get the picture of what I'm looking to show here. Some countries were less than others, but they were still monumental numbers that perished. Again, I'll just leave this up for a moment. You can see that it starts with Austria, Belgium, Greece, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, the Netherlands, and Yugoslavia. Take a look at Lithuania, the third from the right, 153,000 before, 23,000 after. And then the next one is one of, and I wish I could have more uplifting information, but unfortunately this is not that kind of topic, and everybody knows that here. But this one is a miraculous story. This shows what happens when people come together and stand up against tyranny. Denmark. The Denmark story, I'll say a little bit. They saved, I believe it was over 95% of their Jewish population during World War II, during the Holocaust. And part of it was, in truth, is because the Germans, they're their neighbors, their look fit the Aryan look, so they were okay, and the Germans needed the route through Denmark to northern countries that were north of there for resources and different things, and they left them alone. In fact, they came in April and they conquered, or they took over Denmark in April of 1940. But they did not look to clamp down on the Jews until it was late September, beginning of October was when they were going to round up all the Jews. But because it was leaked, a German attaché named Duckwitz, he was in a meeting with a friend who was the head Nazi in Denmark. He heard that they were going to round up all the Jews, and he went out and told 3 key people, 2 of whom became the prime ministers of Denmark. And they right away went to the heads of the Jewish community. And when the Nazis came to get them on the era of one of the most important holidays, Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, most of the Jews were gone. They had escaped to Sweden because Sweden said they would take them in officially. 95%, I believe, is the statistic of how many were saved. By 1945, in summary, by 1945, 2 out of 3 European Jews had been murdered. If that's not an act of genocide, I'm not really clear what is. They actually had a plan. At the beginning, they weren't actually looking to kill the Jews. They just wanted them out of their country. And then it turned in 1941, the late 1941, the thought turned to mass murder. And then by 1942, there was the Wannsee Conference in a suburb of Berlin. And I'm reading a book on that right now. It isn't as though they formulated the plan there and then. They seemingly had already turned in their minds, like I say, in late 41, to kill all the Jews. They even intended to kill Jews outside of Germany, outside of their territories. They were looking to murder all 11 million European Jews. Okay, so this is the next part of the presentation. This is the first of a few letters. They're all written to my father from relatives. And as I said, 150 letters, 120 are in German. And I was fortunate enough to get a wonderful person who was a German linguist who was retired, and he was doing these at about the age of 80, and he was fabulous. So he took all 120 that were in German and he translated them for us. And like I say, this is the first one I wanted to show. So and I'm going to run through this, what was in this one envelope very quickly, because there's not a lot I'm trying to convey, but one important point, the humanity. You know, Jews are people like anyone else, but unfortunately the Nazis didn't look at life that way. You'll see here what I mean. So my dad's first birthday, being away from Germany, he was born in November. This letter is the 9th of November, 1937. No less than a dozen people wrote to him. They didn't want him to miss them, and they wanted to know that they were thinking of him. So, like I say, I'm going to run through these quickly, just point out who wrote what. The top part is from his mother, the bottom part is from his father. This was from his younger brother, Rudy, who I'll be talking about some more a little later. And then from his Aunt Lotta, which was one of my grandmother's sisters, and her husband, Uncle Heinz, and a couple of his little first cousins, Charlie and Jackie. From his grandmother and grandfather. This is all in one envelope. From a family friend, as you can tell from a young one, his little 8-year-old sister, Margot, who is still with us, fortunately, but unfortunately has Alzheimer's. She's 92 or 93, and she lives in Florida. From family friends, and then from a great aunt, Wanda, great uncle Max, her husband, and their child Hildegard. This one is from another sister of my grandmother, his mother, and it's Aunt Greta, Uncle Sammy, her husband, and then their 2 children, Rita and Alfred, who I saw from one of the letters they referred to as Fred. I just saw that. The top part is from his first cousin. They had a big families. His father had 5 brothers, 1 sister, and they had the reverse on his mother's side. 5 sisters, including his mother, and one brother. So that was from first cousin Ruth, who we fortunately, very fortunately came to know. She made it to Great Britain with two of my father's siblings. They came together when they were in their teens and younger on the same ship, early 39, but late in terms of the Nazi reign. From his Aunt Puppa, who was Ruth's mother. I knew Aunt Puppa too, fortunately. From his great uncle Emil and his wife, Aunt Sosha, great Aunt Sosha. Wonderful people. And then finally, like I said, I just wanted to show front of the envelope, because that's what I would always scan, and then the back of the envelope. Now, what you're seeing here is A. Kempner, and that could kind of mean my father, because his name was Aribert, but they called him Ari. But in this case, it's his father. The A is, unfortunately, Adolf Kempner. He was named way before Hitler. And it indicates Charlottenburg. It's ripped here, but it's Charlottenburg, which is a beautiful suburb, or a beautiful part of Berlin, not suburb. I've been there, and it's Siebelstrasse 26, my father's last address, living in Berlin. And that's a picture of the apartment building of 26, or Siebelstrasse 26. I was at the door of that building. My father wanted to go into the courtyard that I know is behind that door. And across to the left corner, I know, is where their apartment was. My mom wasn't too big on him bothering the occupants, the residents, so we didn't do it. But I understood, and quite honestly, I believe my father in his mind somehow felt he'd see his mom, that she'd open the door. But she knew where he was. She had his address. She was writing to him all the time. She knew the people who took him in. She didn't make it. Next letter. This letter, my relatives are caught in what's considered, and I think I mentioned, the precursor to Kristallnacht. And so I'll run through to some things I wanted to show about this. And the reason I say precursor to Kristallnacht, so you may not know, or some of you may very well know what that actually means, but Kristallnacht was a pogrom that was perpetrated by the Nazis. Essentially what happened was that deportation that I talked about, where my grandfather was expelled, and he was expelled with 17,000 other Polish Jews. That was the first deportation, expulsion of Jews, Polish Jews, back to Poland, the first one. What happened was a young girl wrote to her brother, who had left the family. They had sent him to Paris. His name was Herschel Greenspan. And said, "We have been expelled from our home back to Poland." Herschel, 17 years old, checks out the information, finds out it was correct, and is so distraught, he buys a gun. He goes to the German embassy in Paris, asks to see the German ambassador, but is shown a kind of middle or lower level diplomat, a guy named Ernst von Rath. And he goes into von Rath's office, and he's messing with some papers on his backboard. He's not at his desk. When he turns around, he says, as he turns around, he goes, "So what are these papers that you need," or whatever. And when he turns around, he sees a gun, and Herschel shoots 5 times, I believe, hitting him 3 times. 2 days later, he dies. The diplomat, the German diplomat, dies. The information is transmitted immediately to Germany, where Hitler is in an annual celebration of the Nazi Party in Munich. And instantly, the orders are given for all hell to break loose on the Jews. They burn down over 1,000 synagogues. They break the storefronts of a lot of Jewish-owned businesses. People are killed, not huge numbers. People are killed, beaten. This was the spark that they needed, and they allowed it to be the excuse to do this. So I'm just going to read what the arrow, these are the translations that Mr. Gervin did for us, handwritten, phenomenal. So this is my grandmother, my father's father, and my father's brother, my uncle, who wrote this. So where the arrow is, you can imagine what a disturbance we all had. Papa, Uncle Sammy, Uncle Heinz, and Mr. Pfeiffer, and all other Jewish Poles were suddenly picked up on the 28th of October and transported to Poland. Imagine now, my dear child, now we are left behind all alone without any income. To be fair, they really didn't have much to any income just prior because of the Nuremberg laws and other suppressive things that the Nazis did to the Jews. But she was alone. Okay. Just a light aside, this was my father's little brother, my uncle, telling my dad amidst it all what his report card was like during that last term. Okay, this letter, a very important one. My grandfather describes being arrested and expelled back to Poland. Again, a part of that precursor to Kristallnacht. Kristallnacht, speaking to a distant cousin of mine in Berlin who's a professor, he said they don't like to use that name because it means Kristall in terms of crystal and Nacht, night. It kind of puts not the right feeling to it, but essentially the broken glass is understood by everything they did with the storefronts and so forth. So, okay. So that was his actual handwriting, my grandfather. And you see here that on the back of it, it says Herman Rosen and then A. Kempner, Warsaw, and it's Poland. I'll tell you what he says in the letter. As you have heard from Mama, I was deported from Germany 14 days ago, my grandfather's words. Not I alone, but 25,000. They didn't know exactly how many at that time, but 25,000 Polish Jews. Uncle Martin, his wife Aunt Silly, Uncle Sammy, Heinz Pfeiffer, and everyone else. If Grandpa had not been so sick, he would have had to go away too. He was also arrested. And then I have a second arrow there, and what I'm saying there, well, what my grandfather said there rather. About 6:30 a.m., the police came and arrested me the way I was. I had to leave Mama and the children without my things, without money. You can imagine Mama, Margot, and Rudy, his sister and brother. In Warsaw, I have been taken in by strangers. There's a couple more letters here. This one is my grandmother trying to get to Łódź, or as we might pronounce it, Łódź, Poland. The Poles say Łódź, to join my grandfather, who, as I mentioned, was expelled there, and she's trying to get there. By this point, she has sent away all of her children. One of the letters, and I meant to bring it with me, I hadn't put it into the presentation, it sheds light on, because we wondered, my daughter and I, we wondered a lot about this. Who went with my father? How did that transpire? They lived in Berlin. He got on a ship in Hamburg. How did that happen? There is a letter, and I'll have to paraphrase because I can't remember the exact words. But my grandmother says, have you imagined that in a few days you will have been gone from us for a year? I see you getting into the big car and sitting in the window, seeing your face in the window. The car pulls away, taking you to the steamship, and I'm left all alone. So, she writes, my grandmother writes, my dear boy, if it may be, if dear God just means us well still, that Rudy and Margot will come temporarily to London. until later they can come to the United States. Papa's cousin will see to all that in London. That would be a great piece of luck for your brother and sister, wouldn't it? And then she writes at the second arrow, unfortunately, I can't go yet because the Polish Council has to give the permit first. Besides, everything in our apartment, in my apartment, her apartment at that point, had to be sold to be able to pay for the train fare to get her there. And by the way, these were people who were well-to-do at some point before the Nazis came into power. They would have had no problem paying for it. Okay. So on the next page, she writes, thus, and she just described where people went in the family, because I could say it was a big family, or where she thinks they are going to go. And then she writes, thus, we have ourselves all planned out and scattered, the whole family over the world. I can tell you a piece of good news that Uncle Max and Aunt Lenny are going to come to the United States too. They have gotten the required affidavit. But I'm here to say, unfortunately, through my research, that never happens. The all-important affidavit that they had to have per the United States from someone here to link them and that they would be responsible for them, they had gotten it. Uncle Max died suddenly in Prague, Czechoslovakia. This is one of the worst stories. Aunt Lenny, which is really Helena, is taken and sent to the ghetto in Łódź, Poland. There is then something called the last letter. And I'm a little unclear. I used to think it was maybe 900. I'm a little unclear, and I was looking some of that up. There were not many that were allowed to be written. But in May, they allowed German, Austrian, and Czechoslovakian Jews to write letters. And it wasn't thousands upon thousands. They had up to 250,000 Jews in that ghetto. But it was no more than 4,000, but I think it was more like early thousands or around 900. They were allowed to write a letter, which was pleading their case why they shouldn't be sent on. And I'm forgetting the term that they use, but essentially, they may not have even known what it meant, but their being moved and taken out of the ghetto meant they were being sent to a killing camp, which is differentiated from a concentration camp. There were 5, it said there were 6, but recent information indicates there were 5 killing camps. Auschwitz, Belzec, Helmno, Sobibor, and Treblinka. They were going to be sent to Helmno. Her letter, it was actually registered. If you saw this on the internet from some source, it's actually registered to my grandmother. When Mr. Gervin translated it, it turned out my grandmother was mentioned in the letter, but it was her aunt who had the same first name, Helena, and her last name was Aberbach, married name. It was written by her. And the letter is stamped in Polish, rejected. She was sent to Helmno. She was murdered. Fortunately, her children, who weren't children at the time, they made it to the United States. Okay. This letter, one of the key things, or a couple of the key things, is my grandparents have no heat. They are in the Łódź ghetto. This letter is coming from there, and my grandfather is very sick. Okay. So what I'm showing here is this here, Earthnet, means opened. The Nazis indicated that they opened the letter. So you had to be really careful. And my grandfather, when he was in Poland and it wasn't happening so much yet, he tells my father, be very careful what you ask your mother, because she could be badly punished for it. The other part of that is the symbols that you see there are the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the supreme or high command of the armed forces. Okay, the arrow there in the translation, and this is from my grandmother to my father. It really is dreadfully cold when they are where they are, and they live in an unheated room because they can't buy any coal. Your mother is suffering greatly from the cold. Your papa is very sick from undernourishment. He has sugar and kidney disease and 25% sugar. So he's got low, but I inherited the high from the family, and this was one of the medical points that told me what was happening. My father dropped out of high school. He was sent here to Baltimore when he was sent away from Berlin. And he dropped out of high school to take on a second and a third job just to send his parents money so they could have at least the bare minimum things like the coal and what they needed. He was still a teenager, of course. Okay, this will be the last letter that I'm going to show. It's one of the latest letters. It's after, unfortunately, a number of the people stopped writing because they were gone. This is from my uncle, my father's little brother, youngest brother. There were 3 boys and 1 girl. The 3 boys all joined their respective armed forces to fight the Nazis. The younger one was in Great Britain. I had talked about that a little bit earlier. He was in the Royal Air Force as a radio operator, and they leveraged his German first language knowledge to do things to confuse the Nazis. He would be over the radio and would do things, different things to confuse the Nazis. So what you're seeing here, it looks a lot different than the other things. These are transcriptions because they were written in English. They learned English quite quickly. My older daughter, Alexa, right here, she took on as a high school project to transcribe these letters so we can more readily read them. So by the arrow. So this is his little brother, like I said, Rudy, but he's now 19 years old, and it's the letter is the 12th of December, 1944. He writes, oh, and also, he had to change his name. He was told that he had to change his name because as a Jewish boy from Germany, had he been shot down and captured, he would have wished he had died. So he keeps his initials, Rudy Kempner or Rudolph Kempner, but he takes on the name Ronald King. So my father's little brother, my uncle's voice. Oh boy, I'm looking forward to seeing you. Practically all I know is that I have a brother. How he is and what he looks like, I don't really know. You can't really tell from a photo. I certainly know that I won't waste any time after the war in seeing you and Edgar, their older brother. Very unfortunately, in a mission of over 100 Allied aircrafts near Bonn, Germany, Rudy is shot down, the only plane in over 100, and he is dead at 19 years old. I fortunately got to know him somewhat through the letters, and a very kind, good person. Okay, one of the last parts, and there's a few of these. These are some examples of things that you get from the International Tracing Service, now Arlson Archives records. This is part of the Central Name Index, which is, I think, 50 million cards. And this particular one, because there are many different ones, is an inquiry card. And what you're seeing here is Esther Yanklowitz. That was my great-grandmother. This 83786 is very important. It is the tracing and documentation number that was assigned to her by the archivists in Bad Arolsen after they got hold of the records, and people through the years asked to find out what happened, or for other reasons, and I'll explain on here. It indicates, as her birthday is from the Little Black Book, March 10th, 1876, Warsaw, Poland. I'm not sure what that ends up meaning. On the 4th of October, 1942, she is sent to the ghetto concentration camp in Czechoslovakia known as Theresienstadt. And then a little over a year later, maybe 14 months later, on December 18th, 1943, she is sent to Auschwitz, where she perished. It indicates here Verschlossen. Verschlossen means missing, but generally that meant that they were gone. And there are records out there through the German government, because they commissioned or did a tracing of all 550,000 Jews that were in Nazi Germany from 1933, when Hitler took power, until 1945, to find out what happened to them. So there are things that corroborate this. Oh, and the EA Berlin, this was a request from someone, may even have been from my father, for reparation payment for the loss of his family, of his parents. So that's the restitution group in Berlin. I'll just spend a moment on this, but this is really important. This is the back of the card. So when I talk about 200 million scanned images, there is a fair number that are the backs of the card, and it's quite important. So as I said, that number up on the top right on the prior, on the front of the card, the tracing and documentation number, the back, they have breadcrumbs, because it wasn't electronic at the time. And even if it was electronic, it would be stupid electronic. You don't have any, you can't do optical character recognition, because a lot's handwritten and so forth. And so in a lot of cases you can't. But this 155I indicates what collection out of the 31,000 collections it was from. And these dates are dates indicating the dates of the request by different entities for the information about my great-grandmother, or whoever it was for. Okay, whenever you would go and find a record, as I did this, as I helped a wonderful human being, Jo Ellen, at the museum, she's helped me immeasurably in my research. I can't say enough about how wonderful this person is. She taught me that what you do is you copy the cover page of the collection, because again, you need to be able to find your way back. The cover page, the first page, because it often will describe the collection, or it has the column headers or whatever, and then you copy the actual page that the person is on that you're looking for. So what you're looking at here is a description of the collection. And this is for my great-grandmother. She's 66 at the time. And this is when, as I showed you on the tracing and documentation card, when she is taken from her home in Berlin to Theresienstadt, the ghetto concentration camp. The next slide is the actual transport list with her name on it. And if you may not be able to see it, but right here is her name. I got to make sure it didn't move on us, but it may have moved. No, it didn't. I must have changed the size. Her name is right here. So it says Yanklowitz Geb, geboren, meaning born, Laxer, her maiden name, Estera, Sarah. The Nazis required at some point for every female to have the name Sarah and every male to have the name Israel. And that's what's reflected on this transport list for identification purposes. And actually, I blew it up so you can actually see it. That's a snippet from that, unaltered from that transport list. So this is the cover page to the next record that I wanted to show you. It's more of like an 8.5 by 11 or something close to that. This is a transport list, her second transport, December 18th, 1943, to the concentration Lager Auschwitz, to the concentration camp Auschwitz. Now this one, you're going to have to just have a leap of faith and believe me, because you're not going to be able to read it. If you saw it here, you could make it out, but it's hard to really make out because it's the original, I think from a microfilm or something like that. And her name is where the arrow is, unless I resized it, but her name is there. Okay, the next images on the next slide, to me, are very, very interesting. And so I'm going to try to tell you quickly what these are. So they, at first blush, they almost look identical. They are Koblenz Gestapo arrest records, cards. And the top one indicates Joseph, and then my last name Kempner, my great uncle. It gives his birth date, and as I mentioned, he was born in London. That's what they're saying, and he was a manager. Unfortunately, there's no other dates on here, but there's an alphanumeric number, K1143. Now, I have not written to anyone yet, but I'm fairly sure what this means. I think the K indicates a K, Kempner, and the 1143 is the 1143rd K that they registered. Well, with the efficiency of the Nazis, they weren't going to waste the number. The second one says Kempner, says Samuel in parentheses, Mundak, gives two potentials of the date of birth. I know this to actually be his date of birth. The name Samuel was unknown to the family. Mundak, everybody knew. And I was pretty positive this was him, but I don't show anyone anything or tell anyone anything unless I know. I contacted a group that has scanned and indexed millions of Polish records from the Polish State Archives. I knew that there was a Samuel Mundak, an index for him, and the birth year was about right. And you have to picture, I say about right. Sometimes people registered the birth sometime after the birth. It might not have happened exactly. And since he was born on the 13th of December, it could easily have fallen into 91. Turned out, I only had to verify one thing. No one knew Samuel, like I said. There was a record for Samuel through the Jewish Records Indexing Poland. I just had to know, was Samuel's parents my great-grandparents? And they were. They were absolutely the same people. So Samuel, I now knew, was his birth name. Mundak was his nickname. And I now knew this was him. So here's what happened. When Joseph died 2 months before my father left, about October of 1936, because he was born in London and most of the other siblings were born in Poland, he felt his way out of the country, were his brothers who just died, official papers that said he was born in London. So I was told by a couple of the senior members of the family, who unfortunately are now gone, that this is what happened. He took his brother's papers. It was a known thing that the Nazis would go ahead and check to be sure you were who you presented yourself to be. Okay? I'm fairly sure what happened is they didn't want to waste a card and a number more than anything. Samuel Mundak comes in and says, I'm Samuel Mundak, I'm Joseph. They find out, no, you're not. And they re-register him under his real name. Unfortunately, the end of his story is not good because he ended up in Auschwitz as well. I have the cards. I don't have them in the presentation, but I have them. So the next picture is a picture I love. It shows 4 generations of the Kempner side of my family. And I'll describe who's who in here in a minute. But the next one's a little different version of the photo. As you probably are guessing, the red X's mean they perished. My grandfather, my grandmother, Mundak Samuel, the oldest brother Martin, who went to the ghetto with them, and his wife, who went also, Aunt Silly. The 2 with the S's, you might imagine, they survived. This was Arthur, my father's oldest cousin, amongst many cousins, their children, their child. He went to Santiago, Chile, with the brother's sister, Genya, and her husband, Jack. They ended up in Santiago, Chile. I actually was fortunate enough while I worked at Johns Hopkins that one of the researchers that I designed some laboratories for, he is from Santiago, Chile, and he actually got me pictures of the gravestone for Arthur in Chile, which was in Spanish and Hebrew. The next photo is a similar photo in a way, but it's really one generation. My grandmother was the oldest, and these are her 4 sisters. There was a 5th sibling, as I mentioned, who was her brother, but he's just not pictured here. He was the youngest. This was a lot worse. Now, please understand, they didn't perish at this age, okay? They didn't. They were grown-ups. But yet, they perished. My grandmother, this was Aunt Puppa Elspeth, who went to near Atlantic City, Margate City. Her sister Lucy, her sister Greta, and her sister Lotta, who was in the ghetto also with my grandmother and grandfather. I'll tell you more about Lotta later. There's something that absolutely rips my heart out about that family. But in a couple of these instances, the whole family may have perished. You'll see that there were a few outstanding ones that I'm not sure about a handful of people I'm not sure about. Okay, this is the last part of the presentation. Don't worry about all the names. It's just I like to be exact. I like to be able to show people that I truly have done my homework and that I know I'm not just stating something. These are the family members who perished that I know, 25. Now, this extends out to, obviously it's my grandparents, uncles, aunts, great uncles, not really much further than that, and the cousins, okay? So that's the list, and what I'm indicating here is like with my grandmother. I know she went to a concentration camp, but because I follow her through the ghetto, and that she moved to another address once my grandfather died in the ghetto. But I don't know if she went to Auschwitz or Helmno, because I don't know what date she went. But those were both killing camps. And that's basically what I'm saying for everyone I can, and then you see in a lot of the cases, what's in the parentheses is knowing what happened to them. That's just the key to that on the bottom, to my abbreviations. Okay. This is just a breakdown of the family members by relationship and then by family. My father's mother's side or his father's side. My grandmother, my grandfather, so one of each. My great-grandmother, great-grandfather, one of each. Great uncles, 4. Great aunts, 4. First cousins, 1 generation removed, 5. To me, these are all to me. Great-great aunts, 4. Great-great uncles, 2. First cousins, 2 generations removed, 2 were murdered. Amidst all the others, 20 on my father's mother's side, 5 on my father's side. This is the happier side of life. These are the people who survived, but unfortunately were displaced from their homes forever. I mean, you can imagine, they couldn't go back. So the list is at 20, and down here I say the relationship and how many of each of those, of the 20, were my father, aunts, uncles, and so forth. Okay, these were the family members whose fate I do not know at this point, but I don't give up. I don't give up. I will look. If it's humanly possible to find them, I will find them. The one is a great aunt. That was the wife. I found out her name in one of the letters that my father had. The wife of the brother on my grandmother's side. I had said there were 5 sisters, including her, and 1 brother. That's the wife of the 1 brother. Same thing here, but on the Kempner side, on the other side of the family, the wife of Mundak, of Samuel. Don't know what happened to her. And that is the brother that I just spoke about. That's his wife. Charlie Beckerman, a child. And then a child that I knew of, a child of Samuel Mundak and Nellie up there. And then again, I give the accounting of by relationship. So we're coming close to the end here. This photograph, as I say, was taken in January of 1939. I just got this year. And to my daughter and myself, I can't tell you how important it is, even though you'll hear the story in a moment, but how important it is to see these two little boys, two little cousins of my father. They were about 10 and maybe 13 years younger than him. Charlie, born in 1933 in July. Jackie, born on my birthday. We share the same birthday, but 20-something years apart. The fate of Charlie is not known. Jackie perished. So I ask the question, please, please tell me why these two beautiful boys deserve their fate. Why did anyone in the family, why did any of the millions of people deserve their fate? Innocent people. Thank you. So at this point, if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer anything I can answer. We can go for another couple of minutes, or the room is available. I'll stay if anyone has any questions they want to ask.
What did the Kempners do
In Europe, the Kempners and the Yanklowitz is the other side. Were mostly furriers. They were very well-to-do until the Nazis came into power. My father told me, my grandfather, after the Nuremberg laws and other suppressive laws, he would dress up every day in a coat and tie to go get a job. But he wasn't allowed to because he was Jewish. But every day.
In Poland, right, Yanklowitz and the Kempners, are there any
There are some Kempners, which I may still talk to you about. My great-grandmother, Kempner, she is buried in Łódź. She died in 1925, nothing to do with the Holocaust, and they then left. There was one of their children, David, I'm not named for him, David Kempner. He and his family, they left to Berlin, and they took his father, David's father, my great-grandfather, and they went to Berlin. My grandfather, I know it's a lot of relations here. My grandfather Adolf, my father's father, is buried in Łódź also, as well as his older brother Martin. But because it was during the time of the ghetto, I am not clear that those graves are marked. That's kind of the problem I'm having. But those are the only ones I know of. Not to say I'm not going to discover more, but those are the ones I know of.
I think you said that your father and some of his siblings came here in a staggered pace. Is
Yes.
that what you were saying?
Yes.
And so that was just because when money was available or when they had a sponsor here in the United States?
They had to have a sponsor. Go ahead.
And none of those people who came to this country changed their name? I was just recently found my grandfather's naturalization papers, and a lot of Jewish people that came to this country, they say their names were changed to Ellis Island, but that's not true.
That's not true.
It changed after the fact because of
Or
anti-Semitism.
before, or even before they even got on actually set foot on the ship. It didn't change, like you say, in Ellis Island. A lot of people think that. No one changed their name in this part of the family on my father's side, which has been helpful. One little aside, it turns out the Yanklowitz name, I actually flew out to California. My aunt, my father's sister, and their first cousin, two of the three with my father's little brother, went to Great Britain, and they were taken in by Kempners. And they went together on that same ship in January of '39. They never wanted to, meaning my aunt and that one first cousin, they never wanted to speak about the Holocaust, and because they were there. And then when my father passed away, I said to my mom, I said, can you please speak to Aunt Margot and Ruth and see if she'd be willing to talk to me? And they both said, please have Dave call us. And I really got to know my aunt at that point, and we talked and we talked. They told me something which puts a smile on my face amidst all of this. Some of you may have heard of this person. It turns out I have a famous cousin. He's about a third cousin. I don't know if you've ever heard of the fitness star named Gilad. He's Israeli, and he has a fairly thick Israeli accent, and he's known for having the longest running fitness show in the history of all fitness shows. He's a Yanklowitz. He is one of my cousins. And I spoke to him one time, had a great conversation. But it's good that they didn't change because it takes one level of difficulty. They're both not common names, right? So it makes the research somewhat easier in certain ways. And also, I was just able to identify once my aunt and cousin told me about that. Descendants are in the United States? I know that I think they're gone already, but the one that I said, that really sad story where they had the affidavit to get to the United States, and then the husband dies, she's taken, and she writes the last letter, it's rejected, and she goes to Auschwitz. Their three children made it to the United States, and they were older than my father, so they made it as adults, and one of them came over with their kids. So I know those three, and I've been trying recently to find some remnant of that part of the family. The Yanklowitzes, when I called Gilad's sister in California, I said, hello, my name's David Kempner. I introduced myself, I said who I am. I said, I am your cousin. She said, my cousin? First she told me that she wasn't who I thought I was talking to. It was the sister. So I said, I'm your cousin too. and she was knocked over because she had been told that none of the Yanklowitz descendants were around other than my aunt and that one cousin, Ruth. So Ruth came here, her mother came here, my Aunt Margot, after the UK came here. Rudy would have come here, but he was shot down and killed. I haven't counted, but there was, maybe a couple of handfuls, maybe 10, 12, and there may be more. I mean, I just keep going. I keep going. Anybody else have a question? Go ahead.
Could you tell us a bit more about your father? What did he do?
My father was a jeweler.
A jeweler.
Yeah, he was a jeweler his whole life, almost. In the early years in Baltimore, he worked for a dental lab and made dentures and so forth. But he then went into the service. They would not allow him to do what he wanted. There are a number of articles that I have found about him. There's a picture of my mom and my father, both in World War II. My mom is in uniform. And he honestly says he wanted to kill Nazis for what they've done to his family. So once my parents met, and they got married pretty quickly. They met on a tennis court on a base, an Army Air Corps base in Delaware, which is no longer there. They got married, and then soon after he became a jeweler, and he was that for his whole life after that. But an incredibly good person.
You had mentioned Papa's Little Black Book. Could you talk more about that? Because I'm not sure how much you talked about it.
Okay, so that was my older daughter. Essentially, Little Black, it's this big. I physically have it, and then I scanned it and I enhanced images, the writing that was difficult because some was written like in a blue pencil. I was able to enhance it electronically. It's a book filled with family and friends, a lot of times addresses, birth dates, sometimes anniversaries, people saying don't forget me in some cases, his parents, his grandparents, his aunts and uncles, his great aunts and uncles. It's an amazing thing. I'm blessed to have been able, that he kept this and I was able to have it because my ability to corroborate information is fantastic. You know, right away I can tell if a common name person, like for instance, I'm not going to tell you someone perished if I don't know it. There's one of my grandmother's sisters, Lucy, married a man named Hans Cohen, a German Jew. All four, the two children, the parents, I have them on transport lists from Berlin to Auschwitz, the whole family. And given the percentages, 1.3 million people were deported to Auschwitz, 1.1 million died, almost 1 million were Jews. It didn't leave a lot to the imagination. There was a disparity of 200,000 that is somewhat unknown, but they had a death march when the Nazis knew that the Allied forces, Russia, was knocking on the door, and they took 60,000 on a death march. About 15,000 approximately of those perished. So there was roughly 185,000, only 7,000 people were alive out of almost, not fully, but almost 250,000 people. There's a lot of statistics that end up helping to unfortunately know what occurred.
So with all the research and all you've learned and still learning, have you any thoughts about writing a book?
Thanks for asking that, Tony. Actually, you all are witnessing very likely the precursor to a book. And I'm very happy to say that it's going to be a co-authored, my daughter and myself. And I'm doing the research. She and her husband are newlyweds last October, and I didn't want her to have to think about this at all. I said, I will complete the research because I had been spending all these years doing it. She knew how deep I was into it. So I've been taking Microsoft OneNote, and if you're familiar with it, it's made up of the first in the hierarchy of how the program is made. It's made up of notebooks, sections, and then pages. One is underneath the other. So in the notebook, in the section part is probably about 59 names in the family. And then on the pages, I have templates of massive amounts of potential information, vital records, vital information, Holocaust records, Holocaust information, photographs, on and on and on and on. And I am now filling that with my over 25 years of research. So that's where I'm pointed, because I think the story, as I said, and I think you can imagine from hearing me, I really appreciate that you took the time to be here. But I feel that this needs to be shared. It doesn't necessarily change a lot of minds, but it hopefully, like I say, I realistically look at it that people on the fence, perhaps they come to the side of recognizing the truth behind all of it. Any other questions? Thank you again.